Greetings and welcome back to Antagonist's Advocate. I am once again your host, David, and today we will be talking about Sylvanas Windrunner from the Warcraft series. And joining me today is my very special guest,
Kevin Gramling. Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about one of my favorite video games of all time, and one of my favorite characters, at least from just like a coolness perspective, but we'll get into the morals of it all in a moment.
That's the idea. Well, it's my pleasure to have you on. So, I am not a Warcraft veteran. I do not know many things. So, if you would be so kind as to tell me, who is Sylvanas Windrunner, and what does she do?
Yes, of course. So basically the basics. Let's get down to there. She is used to be a high elf ranger before. Evidently, if you've seen any pictures, she has the red eyes, the dark skin. She's undead, but she's a ranger from Quel'Thalas originally. That's where all the high elves are from. Who died at the hands of Arthas, the Lich King, who's one of the pivotal characters in the lore. And she returns, and the elephant in the room is that she has her lore, it spans, she has a really long story up until very recently, and she's had like her own send off. So her story has a nice nice bow tied to it, but it has a lot of kind of sections, and she's been around since the beginning.
Right, there's a lot to go through, but it does have an end.
Exactly. Which is actually not true for most World of Warcraft characters. It's an ongoing live game.
It's still being updated. There's still stories going on. It's active.
Exactly. And most characters, it's an ensemble, right? It's this massive open world MMORPG with an ensemble of important characters. She, for a long time, was just one of them. And in the core canon of the game and in the gameplay, she served as the leader of the Forsaken. So the Forsaken are... there's a lot of undead. The Scourge, Arthas Lich King, I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but his whole thing is he had an army of undead.
As Lich Kings do.
As Lich Kings do, right. And the Forsaken are a band of undead who broke free from his control, regained consciousness, and Sylvanas was their leader. And they're under the Horde. And they used to be human. They used to be human. So their whole thing, the reason why they're called Forsaken, is because they used to be part of a kingdom called Lordaeron, which Arthas was the prince of, which was a part of the Alliance. Alliance has the humans, the elves, right? Whereas if you look over to the Horde, it's like orcs and trolls. So they kind of have like the ragtag band of ragamuffins, like the. Whereas the Alliance.
The fighty ones.
Yeah, they're like and they're like usually like these different beasts and creatures. So these humans get turned into undead and then regain control, and they try to come back to the Alliance.
But they're undead.
They're undead now.
The Alliance does not like that.
Exactly
that.
Like that. They're like, okay. They're like, but you're my parents, and they're like, yeah, well, but now
now you're a skeleton.
Yeah, now you're a skeleton, and you look exactly like the creatures who slaughtered like hundreds of cities, like or hundreds of people. Like, the Scourge. The Scourge is like one of the main villains of like the story. Like they went from city to city. It was this massive plague that killed, like, I mean, I don't know the numbers, obviously, like millions. Like it was a big worldwide event. And so the Horde takes in the Forsaken, but before even the Horde does, Sylvanas is leading them. So a through line of her character is truly, she is like the advocate for this group of people. Exactly. And she's an advocate for this group of people who has no home. And she's not human. She's high elf. But she herself is a Forsaken. She's forsaken by her people. So she finds herself kind of in charge of this kingdom that has no place in this world anymore. And that's really like... So like I said, she kind of has these different eras. She has one era where she's seeking revenge on the Lich King, and she's driven by retribution and vengeance. And then for much of the game, up until recent history, her through line, her objective was just this. And maybe you wanted just a synopsis. I think this is important, but we're gonna elaborate on this, right? But was truly almost everything she did was hell-bent in protecting and preserving and ensuring the continuance of her people, the Forsaken,
Mm-hmm.
where a lot of morally gray things come in.
Yeah, ensuring the continuance of the undead society.
undead, exactly.
You can run into some problems with that, potentially.
Exactly, because they can't reproduce.
Yeah.
They can only reproduce through dead people,
Mm-hmm.
and through these entities called the Valkyr, they're the only ones who can raise Forsaken, and they used to be enslaved by the Lich King, but following his defeat / their liberation, they Sylvanas had a band of them. It's like 7 Valkyr, I think was the specific number.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll get to it. And then her final act. So like you could really, I kind of, the way I interpret is like 3 acts of Sylvanas. Her final act is she goes down a very, very. It was more recent. It was Battle for Azeroth, one of the latest expansions, where it's, well, I say latest because that's, to me, time flies, but it's like 3 expansions ago now. She became war chief following Legion because Vol'jin, who used to, the last war chief. War chief is the leader of the Horde, right?
Yeah.
The Alliance has a king. The Horde has a war chief. She's picked to be war chief, to the surprise of everyone. Vol'jin gets killed by the Legion, which is the army of demons. So there's the Scourge, there's the Legion, there's different bad guys.
All sorts of problems.
Yeah. So there's this wonderful moment. It's actually it's like chilling. There's this Battle for the Broken Shore, which is this was a really cool event where the Alliance and Horde are working together, and they arrive on this like battle. They're facing off against the Legion for the first time in a long time, and a number of main characters die in rapid succession. That was like a really cool. It was like the world,
the juicy stuff.
Exactly, it was a World of Warcraft like Game of Thrones moment where like one after another, like this beloved Crusader paladin is like lifted up by a massive demon and incinerated, and then the next moment you see someone else get like impaled by a demon. Like all these beloved characters getting killed. And there's this moment where Sylvanas, her Dark Rangers, so she has this elite group of, she is a Dark Ranger, but she has her own Dark, which are the undead elves. And they're keeping the flying bats, the demon bats, off of the Alliance soldiers. They're up on a ridge, and the Alliance doesn't see this, but they're being attacked from the back and being completely dominated, so they have to retreat. And all the Alliance sees is Sylvanas and her Dark Rangers like abandoning them. And then the Alliance like gets slaughtered, and then their king gets killed. But what she saw, the reason why she retreated, is because she sees the Horde getting overwhelmed, and then Vol'jin getting impaled twice, who's the current war chief. I totally got ahead of myself, but I'm kind of establishing like the world, right, and the stakes of it all. But there's a moment where Vol'jin is back at Orgrimmar, which is the capital city, and he's like dying of poison, and
after he gets impaled twice.
Yeah. Yes, and there's all the rest of the leaders of the Horde, and he goes like, Sylvanas, like, I spoke to the spirits, and like, you must be the next war chief. And there's like this cool shot where it's like you just see the room and time is going by, so you see like it's the moment after that. Later, Vol'jin is dead. Then it's like these are time skips, and then it's like Vol'jin being taken out of stretcher, and the whole time Sylvanas is so in shock at what she was just told. She doesn't move an inch, and it's like days, like an entire day has gone by. He's been taken out. It's like in the middle of the night, and she's like still standing there. So it just shows like even she was completely shocked. So then what follows is the next expansion or so. She's the war chief, which is like she's gone from the leader of the Forsaken, which is like this small kind of marginalized, really like they have no place, to being pushed up to being the leader of the Horde.
The whole ass Horde, which is like one of the 2 really big groups.
Yeah, so it propelled her to become one of the main characters, immediately centering her in the narrative of the next one, where with her motives have always, that's the thing, her motives have always been centered around the Forsaken, so everyone was curious about where this was going to go, because her only allegiance, even though the game kind of forces them to be like 2 sides, the Forsaken have always been a very neutral group.
Right. they're not really against the Alliance. They're just the Alliance doesn't like them and won't accept them, so they're with the Horde because they're the only people who take them.
Exactly. So what follows is Battle for Azeroth, which immediately starts with her, and there's no other way to put this, like attempting to genocide one of the races in the Alliance called the Night Elves. They live in this huge tree called Teldrassil. This cinematic, and if you can edit this in, there's this it's the battle for Darkshore, and then she orders them to burn the tree. So it's a world tree, and she goes, she's talking to a night elf that's on the floor like impaled, and the night elf is like, "You can kill us, but you cannot kill hope." And then Sylvanas goes like, and she like goes in and she goes, "Can't I?" And then she takes her face and then pushes her to look at the tree, and then she goes, "Burn it." And then she turns around and she goes, "Burn it!" And then all the catapults with like flaming, and then the tree lights on fire, and the night elf who just like instigated her, like tears start like rolling down her face in horror as Sylvanas. So what follows is like the scenes are horrific. Like the Alliance like is scrambling to rescue as many night elves as they can, even members of the Horde, because the Horde is filled with like peacemakers. Like it's not, the Horde isn't aggressive and the Alliance isn't like orderly. Like both sides have like peacemakers. So Thrall, these are main characters. I'm just gonna throw you, but Thrall, I forget, but the leader of the Taurens. The Tauren are like this peaceful people of like, they're cow people or like bull people. Anyway, they're very spiritual. They're horrified at what Sylvanas has done. So what follows is an arc where the main characters of the Horde, there's like a rebellion basically against her because she starts doing all of this kind of offhand, like these things that are too far even for the Horde.
Genocide bad.
Exactly.
And
so
other characters agree.
And
genocide
bad. So now I'm giving you a full synopsis, and this is falling into order pretty well because that's what happened next, right before this, by the way, Blizzard. So this is where kind of the writing comes in and like because people are like, is this just bad writing? Because Blizzard was like, we want to make her a morally gray character. And I think a lot they can agree, like, there's not really anything morally gray.
It's not quite the gray area they seem to be saying it is.
Exactly.
If they consider that morally gray, I'm kind of concerned.
Yeah. Everyone was like, yeah, what is your definition of morally gray? This is morally black. Like, this is
evil.
This is just,
genocide bad. So
the rebellion happened. There's an entire plot line where you're playing as the Horde and you're kind of working with High Lord Sourfang, who's an orc, Thrall, and the Alliance. So the Alliance and these main characters in the Horde are working together because they're like, Sylvanas is taking this too far. And they're doing this below her nose. And what they finally do is they amass an army, and they go to Orgrimmar's the gates of Orgrimmar, which Sylvanas has holed up in. And at this point, she's caught wind of it, right? So she has her own standing army. And Sylvanas is standing, and there's this thing called a Makora, which is a 1v1, a duel, with no magic, and you pick one weapon, and it's an orc tradition. Right. So Sourfang challenges her to a Makora. So there they are.
Honorable duel.
Yeah, an honorable duel. Which is like, I think that's a cliche. Like, you have two armies next to each other, and then you make your leaders fight. Like, never would happen, but it's a fantasy world, so that's fair.
It's fun.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to watch. So she's like, sure, like, let's do it. And he doesn't take his axe. He takes the king of Stormwinds, the king of the Alliance, who's at this point is Anduin. He's this blonde, like, young guy whose dad was killed at the Broken Shore. He has this iconic sword that can split into two.
Is that really taking one weapon? If it's two weapons?
That's a good point. But you're about to see he's not the one we're worried about. Sylvanas and him are the duel starts. Everyone, in terms of the fan base, like, I was like at the edge of my seat, and then suddenly she starts bodying him so easily. He's getting slashed on the side. He like can barely keep up, and then he like falls to his knees, and she's like, And then she starts having her villain moment. She's going, well, I don't mean to apply any labels to her. She's having her
evil monologue.
Yeah, she's having her monologue moment. Well, he doesn't have to be evil yet, but she goes, the toy soldier's playing. Or no, she doesn't say this yet. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. But she goes like, you thought, like, bitch, you thought. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then you think she's about, but then he says something about like. She roasts him. He says something about like for the horde, and then she like goes in to slash him, and he like splits the sword in two. And cuts her face. So that's the first time he makes contact with her. She's been running circles around him, but then he actually manages to land a hit, and it like slashes her face, and it pisses her off. And that's when she goes, you all, and now she's not just she's regarding her own loyalists. So there's loyalists and the rebels. She goes, you all are toy soldiers playing at this game. And then he goes, he gets really Sourfang goes for Azeroth. So at this point it's not a Horde or Alliance thing. He goes for Azeroth, and he starts running at her, and then she just lets loose this like dark magic that no one has ever seen before, instantly pulverizing him. And then she like looks around, and everyone is shocked. Like her loyalists, like there's a shot of like her a Forsaken, an undead, goes like what the fuck did she just do? And then she gets mad, and then she looks around. She's like. She realizes she fucked up. She like looks around, and she's like, you are nothing. You're all nothing. And then she disappears. She turns into like a little shadow wispy thing, like classic evil or classic disappear into nothing. Smoke. Well, from then on, she takes the role of a villain, right? She takes the role of an antagonist. So she's no longer the war chief of the Horde.
Shit.
Yeah, exactly. And in the next expansion, Shadowlands, and this is where World of Warcraft got a lot of criticism, is they go off to the realm of the dead, where there's a new villain called the Jailer. I want to focus on Sylvanas pre this, but she's a villain. She's like just a through and through villain. Like there's not really that much morally confusing about her. She's just a henchman for the main bad guy until the very end, where something happens. Honestly, I wasn't keeping up too much to this lore, but she gets released, and it turns out that this whole like these past few years, like she's been under his like control a little bit, and then she has this like sappy moment where she's like, like I feel so bad for what I did, or like not really, but like that she doesn't put it like that, but she's tasked to go into the afterlife, where all the elves that she genocided were sent, and find them one by one and take them to like because there was have you seen the show The Good Place?
Yes.
So you know how there's like all the souls were being sent to the bad place, even though they're supposed to be. So that's the story of the afterlives was basically taken, like it was literally that, where all the souls, everyone who was dying was being sent to this place called the Jailer's Domain. I don't know what it's called. Like I'll give it a name. It was like I'll just call it like AT double hockey sticks. So everyone was being sent to the bad place to power this engine or something, to give him power, the Jailer power. So she's tasked at the very end of her story. The last thing is like go find every single soul that you sent here and take them back to where they rightfully belong. So that's like an indefinite thing. I don't think she's ever going to come back.
Yeah, it sounds like it'd take a while.
Yeah. So that's a synopsis. Like I said, they gave her like kind of a not a fairy tale ending, but like one of those endings that it's like, and then she for the rest of time did this.
Yeah. Where it's not impossible that they could bring her back if they felt like it, but they're probably not going to.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So, oops, it was secretly mind control the whole time.
Yes. Oh, so annoying. I think that's such a cop out.
Yeah. Was it really, or did they write her badly and then decide they could fix it by making it mind control the whole time?
I mean, that's the kind of the $1 million question, given that there was a time where they were using language like in these candid interviews, right? Blizzard kind of prides themselves where like their developers are having these candid interviews. Like, yeah, I really feel like I'm really excited where Sylvanas is going to go from here. Like, we really wrote this morally gray character. Like, the way they were speaking about it is like they were excited for the fan base to have conflicted feelings about her. In the direction they went was just kind of
Not
off the wall. Yeah.
Well, that did answer the question I was going to ask of why'd she do that.
It
When-
can.
When does the mind control start, ostensibly?
They leave it kind of up to question. That's the thing. And there's they hinted at the fact that when Vol'jin tells her that the spirits picked her, there was later on we meet the spirit of the death. His name is Bonsami, the Loa of death, and he had ties to the jailer. So people were like, so the spirit being him, it was like all part of this plan.
He, the spirit who was all the hidden machinations of the death entities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I will say, before then, she was a much more interesting character because she would have. There were things like, the Battle of Wrathgate was this time where the Alliance and Horde were working together fighting the Lich King, and the Lich King comes out, and then suddenly these not cannons, these catapults, these plague catapults roll up from top of a hill. They love the tops of hills in this game.
Of course. It's the big
And
dramatic reveal.
and they rain down this plague that Forsaken doctors have made, which kills both the undead and the living.
Ooh.
And they blanket the battlefield with it. And one of her generals comes out, and he's like, "Behold, the vengeance of the Forsaken." So this is a Forsaken move, and it both almost kills one of the leaders of the Horde, one of the leaders of the Alliance, and Arthas. Arthas almost dies. So it's like Sylvanas has a history of kind of doing these controversial things, but before there was always this motivation of like, for the Forsaken.
Right. It was to protect her people, and then once she got more people and also mind controlled, then it got into other aspects, got confused it a bit.
Yes. And where the Valkyr play into this is every time she dies, one of the Valkyr had to sacrifice themselves to save her. But the Valkyr are the only thing that can make more Forsaken.
Right. So they can't all do that, because then that's the whole point.
Exactly. So throughout the lore is like, there was one time where so this is kind of crazy, but after Arthas dies originally, she flings her, there's Icecrown Citadel, which is he's like this massive citadel where he lives. She flings herself from the top, thinking that her purpose is done. And she dies, but gets saved by the Valkyr, and they go, "Your duty's not over.
You're not done here."
Yeah, and one of the Valkyr has to sacrifice themselves, right? And then the ones that are like still there, they're like, "You have a duty to the Forsaken. You can't forsake them either." So from then on, she becomes like the kind of the protector of the Forsaken.
Right. That adds a new dimension to it, that she's the protector of the Forsaken, and doesn't, or at least didn't want to be.
Right.
You get, I mean, I assume, this has happened before, but she gets resurrected without her consent, basically.
Exactly.
I mean, of course, that was the first thing, that's how she became Forsaken. I assume you don't consent to being reanimated to serve the Lich King, but
Right.
that's a bit different, because when they serve the Lich King before they break free, are they sapient? Do they think, or are they just skeleton?
I think the Forsaken specifically, that's a good question, honestly. I know Sylvanas could. I think they're pissed when they retain their memories when they're when they were released from their control. Like, Sylvanas remembered everything she did. So yeah, she was like a high general for him.
Right, so she must have been able.
So she was like,
she wouldn't be much use as a general otherwise.
Exactly. I don't know if that applies to all the Forsaken, but I have a suspicion it does. Yeah.
All right. So it's she does indeed have a long story with a lot of twists and turns in there, but
Exactly.
driven primarily by a desire to protect her people, the Forsaken. And why is it that she is So she becomes the leader. She is the leader of the Forsaken and their protector after this getting resurrected by the Valkyr. Was she? And she was their leader before that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, she was. So she was leading them. So a little bit of timeline. There was the expansion Wrath of the Lich King, which is the expansion where you face the Lich King and at the end you kill him.
Right.
She was a leader of the Forsaken before then, but I don't think she really played this important of a role. And she was driven by vengeance. Like there was that moment, for example, where the Wrathgate incident. That's not a moment of her preserving her people. That was a moment of pure, like, unbridled desire
rage and
for, like,
vengeance for herself and for her people, but also for the things that he made her do and all that.
Exactly. And it's a shared desire for vengeance across, like, the Forsaken and herself. Like, that's something they all had in common was, like, fuck Arthas.
They all hate that guy.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting is in the same way, I think it's fair for us to assume that following Arthas's death, the Forsaken also kind of lose this direction.
Right, yeah. When your main goal is vengeance, after you get it, you no longer have a goal. That's the end of a lot of movies about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so while Arthas is alive, or animate, I guess, if he's a Lich King, he's not really alive.
Right.
Then her primary goal and motivation is to get vengeance against him. Not exactly a heroic good person goal, but not really evil either, especially when the person you're getting vengeance again is the Lich King, who presumably does a lot of evil.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, she shifts to being more protective, keeping her people safe, and that's good person stuff. Generally. Gets a little questionable when they're undead, and to make more of them, you have to do that.
Well, exactly. So it makes it a little easier when you're actively at war with another nation or another side, because let's say hypothetically, like, when you think about it, like, from the perspective of the real world, if there was a nation that had to sustain itself by, like, killing people, that would obviously be a problem. But
less of a problem if you're at war, I guess. Certainly less of a problem if you're at what is considered to be a justified war.
Yeah, which is kind of the idea is, like, it's a 50-50, like, both sides are equally engaged, and it's open war, like on site.
A proper war.
Yeah, it's like on site, we kill you.
Yeah.
So following Arthas's death comes the expansion Cataclysm, with most of it's not relevant, but in each expansion there's obviously a lot of, like, plot lines that happen.
Right, something happens.
And one of them is you're introduced to the race, which is a new race you can play, is called the Worgen, which are basically humans who can turn into werewolves from Gilneas. They're from the kingdom Gilneas. And the plot line of Gilneas is they're being invaded by the Forsaken. So your first 13 levels, your intro to the Worgen is like, you play a little bit, but then you get turned into a Worgen, but then the final, like, 5 levels is like this battle against the Forsaken, so basically the Forsaken is, like, invading them, killing them, and turning them into more Forsaken.
Right, because they need. And are they doing that because they need to kill people to make more Forsaken, or is that part of it, but they have other reasons?
It's a mix of we're at war with you, but it is Sylvanas, like, we have a people who will, if we all died, we wouldn't have any more. You know what I mean? So
true of everyone, but
yeah,
I get what you mean.
Yeah, sorry. Like, there's no way to continue our people.
Right.
Like, her only way to continue the Forsaken is through more combat.
And they can't just, like, go around to graveyards and stuff. Do they have to be, like, fresh, or is that just not practical?
I guess that's not practical.
And I guess people would probably object to that. Well, I mean, I assume people object to unjustified wars, but they would probably object more to you going to, like, their graveyards to harvest their dead.
Yeah, I'm sure there's, like, some reason written somewhere that I'm not privy to that kind of explains that little nuance. But Yeah, and there's more things. Like there's a plot line in the expansion Legion that follows Broken Shore, and there's a cinematic where. So at that point, she was dwindling in Valkyr. So that's the other thing, is every time she dies, she loses a Valkyr. And I wish I could recount all the reasons, all the times she died. But in Legion, it was a plot line where she like only had 2 or 3 left. But there was a new zone. One of the themes in Legion was like Viking mythology. There was a zone that was kind of Viking-esque, and there was like Odin, and there was basically all these new Valkyr. We discovered this new people, and they had their own Valkyr that were never touched by the Scourge. So all of her Valkyr were like liberated. So she kind of has her own Arthas-y moment where she finds this relic, this lamp that will like enslave, can enslave a Valkyr. I think it can enslave anyone, but when you're playing on the Horde side in that zone, the ending is you're like, you corner a Valkyr, and so the cinematic is like her, and she has the Valkyr tied up, and she's like walking forward, and she's about to she enslaves the Valkyr, and then Gen Greymane, who's a Worgen, who she killed his son during during her invasion,
right?
So he hates her.
Yeah.
He comes out and stops her and destroys the lamp, and the Valkyr like escapes, and he's like pissed at her. And I wish I knew the quotes. I usually know so many voice lines and quotes, but
there's lots of stuff here. You already know an impressive amount.
Thank you. So that cinematic that was one of the morally gray
That
moments.
is one of the morally gray moments. Yeah, because was that before they said they wanted to make her morally gray?
So they were already doing a good job at making her morally gray, in my opinion.
Okay.
I thought that was so much more interesting than what they did later on.
They were trying to write a normal character and wrote her morally gray, and then decided to make her more... I guess it makes sense if she was already morally gray, but they didn't think that trying to make her gray would... Because if she's already morally gray and you then decide to make her gray, you have to make her worse than she was before.
Yeah.
And if she's already morally gray and you make her worse, then you have to make her evil.
Yeah, quite sure.
Okay, because that one, that's... You do a bit of slavery, but you ensure the preservation of your race. But is that ethical anyway? And,
right. Because these Valkyr from this new kingdom...
Slavery bad, of course.
Yeah. No, of course. But these Valkyr from this kingdom, like, had no ties to her, had no ties to the Forsaken. The other Valkyr were happy to help her, right? Because they were enslaved by the Lich King themselves. Mm-hmm. So they themselves had, like, a duty to the Forsaken. Whereas they're getting removed one by one, and then she discovers this new king. So that entire plotline had nothing to do with the Horde. So that's the thing that I think is interesting, is like, she's never been this like fighter for the Horde. Like, that was entirely for the Forsaken, what she was doing there. She was the only one who had any use of a Valkyr. So so she pissed people off.
Right. Oh, and that actually... Did she... So I assume... Did she ask the Valkyr to help before trying to do the slavery? Or did she just go straight to not give them a chance?
You know what? I don't think she asked. But I think it came from a pretty well reasoned assumption that... Right.
Yeah, I assume certainly that the free Valkyr, or whatever we want to call them, the ones who were not from the Forsaken, would not do the, like, resurrect Sylvanas at the cost of their own life, but they might have agreed to, like, raise more Forsaken,
right,
without being coerced.
Yeah, that's an interesting question that I guess I hadn't thought about.
It doesn't speak well to Sylvanas that she defaulted to the slavery instead of... I mean, do we know that she didn't try that, or are we assuming here?
I wish I could say for sure, because there's always, like, World of Warcraft has so many different facets that there might be some quest dialogue that, like, mentions it. But World of Warcraft tends to default to punch, fight, do things.
Yes.
Let's not talk about it. Like, so I'm not surprised if they were just like, no one questions the idea that maybe she would just go ahead and like, do that. But the Valkyr, but it's important to know that from what I understood, that Valkyr was like lawful good. Like, she herself, those people weren't like. It's a pretty messed up thing to do.
Yeah.
Generally, like, there's the Horde had nothing against them. Basically, is what I mean. Mm-hmm. If I remember correctly, which I think I do. So yeah, that was one of the more like morally gray, but from her perspective, it was like
it's necessary.
Kind of necessary, right? Mm-hmm. This is like she saw an opportunity.
If it's the survival of your people, and that's your primary goal, and it's an admirable goal, then you do what you gotta do,
right?
Or do you? Sometimes that's genocide, apparently.
Well, yeah.
But not really, because it was mind control all along.
Exactly. Well, beyond the... Yeah, because it stopped being about the Forsaken. The genocide had nothing to do with the Forsaken.
Why did she say she was doing it? Or did she just say, do this, that's your orders, I'm the war chief, go?
Well, it was a retaliation, actually, if I remember correctly, to... So Battle for Azeroth starts with two battles, and it's called Battle for Azeroth. But it's basically that expansion was the expansion they claimed was going to center on the faction conflict, which they hadn't in a while. It's like always a big bad comes in, and they stop fighting and work together. Big bad. So then they were like, now we're going to have an expansion where there's no big bad.
These guys are actually enemies.
Yeah, because you start to forget really. Mm-hmm. So. The expansion starts with the battle for Lordaeron. Mm-hmm. So Sylvanas, you know how the Forsaken, the kingdom when they were alive was Lordaeron.
Yeah.
Following everything that went down in the Scourge's invasion, Lordaeron is all undead, but they go back to Lordaeron as undead. It's completely empty and destroyed, and they live in the Undercity, which is like the sewers beneath what the city was.
Right.
So the Alliance invades Lordaeron, and this is such an important part, is whether or not the battle for Lordaeron came first. And then, can I fact check this? Of course. So Battle for Lordaeron was them retaliating for her burning the tree. So it's not looking good for Sylvanas.
No.
Yeah. So she invades Darkshore, which is the tree is in the ocean. The tree is in the ocean, and then there's Darkshore, and the Darkshore is inhabited by night elves as well. So the horde, the horde is invading Darkshore. They get to the shore, which is across from the tree, and her intention is to invade the tree, and annex it.
Right.
But then, apparently, like from the outside, she gets pissed off at what this random elf says and then decides to genocide a people. So the mind control is a little believable there, because everyone was like, why did she jump here?
Right, yeah, okay. So what she said the reason was, the reason the horde, the most of the horde was going with was, this is a war of conquest, we are here to annex this place, which is much less bad than the war of genocide to do genocide.
Yeah.
Much less bad. And especially, is that normal for the Horde? Is that sort of what they do? Not genocide, I mean like wars of conquest.
Oh yeah, on both sides. Well,
right, this is medieval fantasy game. Of course you do wars of conquest. That's what you do.
Exactly, and the game is... Yeah, like, unlike us in the real world, it's like... There's no like UN or like war crimes division.
Crimes it's like exist.
It's like, no, do what you can to win. Just don't
be evil.
Yeah, like don't kill thousands to hundreds of thousands of people.
Murder random people, kill soldiers, conquer territory. Not kill peasants, because don't do that.
Canonically, we're talking about like the bulk of women and children. Well, night elves are matriarchal, so I guess men and children. I don't Sorry, that was a very human, real life centric way of looking at it. But children dying,
Non-combatants.
Non-combatants.
And children
Yeah.
who are also non-combatants. I hope. Right. So, let's see if we can decide here. So she's initially motivated by vengeance and does that, and then becomes the protector of the Forsaken until she becomes the war chief of the whole Horde as part of evil machinations, and then gets mind controlled and does evil.
Yeah.
Right.
Some pretty bad evil.
Some really bad evil.
And in fairness, I don't know if I should even say this because it was pretty bad, but like I'm applying the label genocide, but like I don't think it's anywhere in like official texts. I think it's a fair thing to say, given that the Night Elves themselves are like, there's a lot of races in World of Warcraft that like they can be the most played race by the player base, but canonically that's like supposed to be a small.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Night Elves.
I have played a Tiefling Bard. I know.
Exactly. So the Night Elves are supposed to kind of be this not as like common, and they're supposed
to. And they live here
in this tree.
Like some individuals may live elsewhere, but this is the only major population of them, right?
Exactly.
Right.
So I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, that's genocide.
Yeah.
Like, even if the game doesn't call it that, it is.
Yeah.
Because, I understand if they wouldn't. You don't want to throw words like that around in this kind of game, because then you get into problems.
Yeah.
Although, if the player is supposed to view that as bad, then it's not a problem. Mm-hmm. And I, from what you said, when you are a Horde player at that point, you're working with the rebels rather than you don't support Sylvanas in her genocide.
Well, yeah. The interesting thing about that is that started the rebellion comes at the second half of the expansion, so you have to like serve the Horde post that for a while. But right off the bat, characters start voicing their like dissenting opinions.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like their thoughts like, oh my god, that was horrible. But like I guess we're no one's like said anything, so you just kind of keep going.
Well,
but then
she is the war chief,
yeah.
So
and
the spirits chose her.
Yeah.
I guess this is what we're doing.
Exactly.
And then, guys, come on, we cannot do this. We can. This is bad.
She kept going too far. She does quite a few things that expansion, if I remember correctly. But yes, so we were about to make some decisions.
Yes, we can make some decisions. Certainly, we can ask some questions. So, I'm starting to realize this question is not always applicable, but I'll ask it anyway. Is she wrong?
I think for this question we can focus on her first two acts when she's not mind controlled, because
Yeah, when she gets mind controlled, it gets pretty hard to discuss her as a character, because then is she really acting as herself? How much control can she exert? It really depends on the mind control, and I assume we don't really know all the details.
Yeah.
So we can't really judge based on that, which is difficult, because that's where a lot of the juicy stuff was. But there was good stuff before that, so let's talk before.
Yeah. So was she wrong, first of all, for the driving a campaign of vengeance against Arthas, and then second of all, everything she did to preserve her people, even the kind of nastier things like an attempted enslavement of a Valkyr? Mm-hmm. I love a character driven by vengeance from a personal standpoint. That's one of my favorite themes in history, in fantasy, and so on that front, I think, though, the Battle of Wrathgate is just one example of the Forsaken of okay, well, did you have to bomb the Horde and the Alliance? Yeah. Why is everyone? And if I remember correctly, his quote is the grand vengeance, against the living and the dead. He said something like that. Which is I guess they have every right to. They were pissed at because the living has forsaken them too. Is kind of the idea.
Well, the Horde didn't.
But the Horde.
Some of the Horde did.
Yeah, I have to. I wish I could, from a moral perspective, I wish I could remember exactly who in the Horde was there at that battle, because there might have been some kind of underlying.
Might have just been only the assholes.
Yeah, because like I mentioned, they weren't really accepted anywhere. Even in the Horde.
They were a marginalized community. They were still outcasts, just not quite as outcast.
Because the horde can't judge, because they have orcs, which are alien invaders, essentially, and also like the blood elves are, you know, a small group of people who, so the idea is the horde is filled with outcasts.
Mm-hmm.
So, but out of outcasts, they're pretty outcasts, like they're decaying bodies. So I don't think she's wrong. I don't think wrong is the word to apply to her, and I don't think she's wrong for the Valkyr tasked her with
protecting her people.
Your people have a right to exist in this world. Mm-hmm. They were given a right because they died once, and without their consent, they were brought back.
Right. None of them asked for this.
Yeah.
And they're people now, and it is it is now your responsibility to protect them, to keep them alive, to continue the people.
Yeah. And not just any people, but like they are like deeply traumatized. Like when you think about it from their perspective, like how horrifying that must be.
Oh yeah.
Because they have the conscious and mind of a human, right? Mm-hmm. But they've been through this trauma. They if I remember correctly, like the or the, you know, cosmology, or like the science behind it, like they remember what they've done, and
they remember what they did as Forsaken. Do they remember their lives before they died? Yes,
that
makes raising new Forsaken from the corpses of your military enemies a little complicated.
Yes, that's something I've always thought about, because
how do those Forsaken feel about that?
Like, oh, you killed me, and then like I was on the enemy team, but like now I'm supposed to be on your side. But I do remember there was a plot line where you're helping someone remember what they were like when they were born, or what they're. So I think how it works is you're not necessarily immediately privy to your memories before, but you can remember them.
That sounds more in line with what this sort of thing usually is.
Yeah. But yeah, with the Forsaken, I think she's not wrong. She was tasked, hey, by any means necessary. Is like kind of her approach was, by any means necessary, I have to protect and ensure the best I can, the livelihoods of these people that have been, you know, abandoned by the world. Mm-hmm. And she was doing a pretty good job. I mean, she led them to battle. She protected them. She advocated for them. Like that's kind of the role she played.
Right.
Because she was like in the war room. She's like one of the leaders. So they were like the horde would have like council meetings, and she was always the one who'd advocate for the Forsaken. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of her position. So I don't think she was wrong.
I agree. I think, you know, she was given her task, and it was a good and reasonable thing to want and to do and to desire. And she did it, and that's what she did, what she needed to do to get that done, to achieve that, and that doesn't feel wrong.
Okay, but now
our next question: is she a villain?
If we're talking about the first two acts of her existence, I think the hard answer is no. I agree. It sounds like a no. Yeah, because if you're playing, and this comes kind of into role playing and the nature of a MMORPG. Right. If you're playing as a Forsaken, you can play as a Forsaken, right? Mm-hmm. She's your leader. Right. She's fighting for you. Yeah. If you're playing in the Alliance, she's an enemy. She is a villain. And if you're playing as another race in the Horde, you're probably ambivalent about her. Mm-hmm. You might. She's on the team, but she's not really your person. She's not really for you specifically, but she's not an enemy. Yeah. But she doesn't like serve as a narrative antagonist most of the time. And it feels like most of the time you encounter her, she's in the game. She's not there as a villain. She's sometimes there as an enemy, just like if you're on the Alliance. But that, I mean, of course, if you're on one side of the war, then half of the characters are always your enemies. Well, all Horde characters are your enemies if you're in the Alliance, except in the special things where you're fighting together, which is apparently a lot of the time. Yeah, too much in a lot of people's opinions. Right.
Yeah, and then later when she's getting mind controlled, then she serves as a villain. She does the big evil.
Cookie
She
cutter.
is definitely evil at that time, but then she's getting mind controlled.
Yeah. I think the most interesting, kind of the most, was the transition. The transition from her going to another, like, horde leader to what she became at the very end was so interesting because there was that middle ground where no one knew what Blizzard wanted us to feel about her.
Mm-hmm.
We were
middle
all so
time
confused.
when she was doing big evil, but you weren't against her yet,
Yeah.
and if you were in the horde, then she was your leader at the time, and yeah, that would be the interesting period.
Yeah, it's like I think Blizzard kind of forgot.
Have a little "Are we the baddies?" moment.
Yeah, Blizzard kind of forgot the simplicity that we kind of expect and hope for and feel comfort in like being told who the bad guy is.
Mm-hmm.
I think they kind of wanted to have this moment where they wanted us to like decide for ourselves. So like, who do you like and who do you don't? Like, pick your allegiance. But I think for the MMORPG, frankly,
That's not really what you're looking for most
No.
of the time. Certainly, there are plenty of games where that's a great thing, but that's not this game.
no. It's like, I think people were just like, so do you want us to look at her like a bad guy? Because we were getting the vibes that Blizzard they wanted her to be somewhat like,
Morally gray.
yeah, like like some redeeming qualities of like, oh, she's fighting for the Horde. In the cinematic for Battle for Azeroth, she has this moment that gives you goosebumps, and she has one moment where you were like, wait a minute, like, I see why she's the war chief, where she's like fighting and they're losing the battle of Lordaeron, and then she jumps onto this siege tower, like she's like fighting like crazy, and then she like gets really pissed and like unleashes her banshee mode, and she goes, for the Horde.
Yeah.
And that's the first time you hear her say that, and suddenly like everyone, like all the Horde, like it literally sent, the first time I saw it, sent goosebumps down my throat, because I was like, wait, I see the vision, like her fighting for the Horde. And then they just threw it all away. I was so excited for her to like fight for the whole Horde, and then they didn't do that. But yeah.
All right. Now I'm getting these vibes. Are you a Horde player?
I never picked a side. It's hard. It's hard. I think a lot of people in World of Warcraft who play World of Warcraft do, but I would have characters in both. But I think I've always had an affinity for the Horde. Yeah.
I'm getting that vibe.
Yeah.
And our final question. Is she evil? Now, I think I know what your answer is going to be. I think it's going to be the same as the last two questions.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Oh. Well, you know what? That's
or am
hard.
I not? It's a good question.
Well, if your criteria of evil was like, she's doing these bad things and like not changing, and it's like, you know, it's bad.
Does she look for a better way?
I don't think she does. She kind of does these things that are like, oh, that was fucked up. Like, that just was fucked up.
Even before the mind control shenanigans.
Way before the mind control shenanigans. I mean, the fact of the matter is, and they address this, and they even address this, I think, in her her final arc, is she's a deeply traumatized individual, to the point where, like, in the moment right before she burns the tree, she tells, so you need to see the cinematic, it's fantastic. But she leans down to this elf who her back is covered in arrows. It's like a horrifying sight. This elf that she's just been down, and she's like on the floor, and Sylvanas recounts her story, tells Sylvanas' story to this elf who's on the floor. She's a general of the Night Elves, and we see like the moment before she gets turned by Arthas. We like recount it, and like you can just it's just like so much pain and grief and hatred. There's like it's a really short cinematic, but like her people were genocided before. Like her own people were genocided by the Scourge,
the
though.
people of Lordaeron.
Well, her people were her people are the elves.
Right.
She's a high elf.
She's a high elf. Yeah.
Yes. So separate from Lordaeron, the Scourge basically did like they
kill a lot of people.
Yes, they killed 90% of the elf population. This statistic I know because I played a high elf. So there was they all lived in Quel'Thalas, most of them. The Scourge arrived and killed 90% of their population. She was their Ranger General, which is like, I don't know what the comparative to the military, but she's like the top. The Ranger General of the elves is like, she's the top one of the military. And then out of that 90%, the 9% of them became Blood Elves, and then 1% of them stayed as High Elves. But that's neither here nor there. The Blood Elves joined the Horde, and the High Elves stayed in the Alliance. But she's fighting, and the undead are coming, and there's a mother and a baby, and she's like, "Get behind me, go, go, go!" And she's like firing the arrows, and then Arthas like rides in on his horse and stabs her in the heart, and she gets one final look, and she sees she's like in the golden field, and she sees the mother and the baby, or she can just see the baby, but they're like cold on the floor, dead. And that's like her final moment before she turns into a banshee. She's the banshee queen. That's important. Like, she's a banshee. So she's this deeply traumatized character who committed atrocities under the Lich King, and then was driven just by a single-minded desire for vengeance. So I don't think I'm afraid to. I think she's one of those evil characters that's like, you
can empathize, you can understand, because she has a lot of reasons to be like that, but it's still evil.
Yeah, I think she's
still
evil.
Doing a lot of bad stuff.
I think if you zoom out, you're like, yeah, she's evil. Like, there's other characters in the world that have been traumatized, who don't consistently like do the worst possible option. Like, oh yeah, kill everyone, or like gas everyone, including the bad guys. She could have. They did not have to do that, but she just. It's like the Forsaken are just inherently like this bitter, spiteful people. Right. So yeah, I think she is evil.
Right. Well, that is an interesting conclusion. I'm glad to be proven wrong. Well, what do you think, dear audience? Is Sylvanas Windrunner evil? Does she deserve to be called a villain? Was she wrong? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. Please join us, discuss, voice your own opinions. And of course, join us next time on Antagonist Advocate. Thank you, Kevin.
Oh my God, thank you. I had such a blast. I didn't know like how much I knew, honestly. Like,
yeah, well,
all
you
locked
know
in
a
my
lot.
brain. Thank you. Peace.
Brother, are you well?
I'm good. I've caught wind of what you plan to do with Earth. I'm sure you know where I stand on it.
I do, brother. You have ever been kind to these people, but I do what I must for the Empire.
You're not being fair. You can't expect them to understand the gravity of the situation. Let me talk to them. Send me in. I can explain. We have time.
No, brother, we do not. You're right that I cannot expect them to understand. They will not even with your prodigious skills. We do not have time, brother. We cannot wait.
Don't explain the stakes to me. I fully understand. I know time is of the essence, but what different are we from them, the invaders? If we destroy, they intend to come and leave us with nothing. No people, devastation. How different are we if we do the same?
We are not such monsters. We are doing this to protect our people, to save the galaxy. We do what we must.
Is Earth not a part of the same galaxy?
We are not going to just simply destroy them all. I'm not a monster, I'm not a murderer. I'm not quite like our dear sister yet.
Our dear sister is the one who told me about your plans. She seems to think it's the only course of action. You're sounding a lot like her.
I am trying to speak to them. I am speaking to them. I am negotiating. I do not expect they will agree, but that does not mean I will kill them all. I will try. I do try to do this as bloodlessly, as peacefully as possible, and I would like nothing better than for not a single life to be lost.
I understand that, and I so appreciate your lofty goal. But they're not dumb. They see the fleet, they see the weapons, they're drawn. Of course they're going to be defensive. Just 20 years ago, they thought we were alien invaders. They don't understand. You need to talk to them. They haven't even seen what the invaders look like. Not that we have or we fully understand them yet, but they don't get it. The planets that I've folded into the Empire, it took explaining. It took sharing the information. That's what it requires.
Place too much faith in these people, brother. They will not understand. We cannot make them understand unless they see the invaders themselves, and if that day comes, I cannot protect this world. We do not have the forces to stop an invasion. They do not come in small groups, brother. You know this as well as I. These people will not believe without seeing, and we cannot make them see without making them die. And I am trying to save lives, brother.
I'm sure Father would be proud of you right now. Huh.
He ever is. Still, thank you for your concern. I assure you, I'm doing my very best.
I'm not done yet. I haven't given up on Earth. I'm taking ship. I'll be there.